Head to the next slide. My name is Marisol Jimenez-McGee. I work for an organization called El Pueblo, which is a nonprofit statewide advocacy and public policy organization that emerged in the mid-90s. Essentially, what was happening in the mid-90s was that a Latino community was emerging in North Carolina, and a group of people got together and said, why don't we celebrate this? Why don't we celebrate this community and introduce ourselves to North Carolina and have this exchange? And so they decided to organize a festival. And this festival was held in the parking lot of Chapel Hill High School. Some 2,000 people came together, and it was the first ever La Fiesta del Pueblo. And it was here in North Carolina. And it was a really exciting event. It was an opportunity for Latinos to see themselves, to see each other in one place and celebrate the fact that we were here in North Carolina as a community. But it was also an opportunity for North Carolinians to see the Latino community in a way that was really safe and fun. Try the food, listen to the music, see the art, maybe try some salsa. It was just an exchange, and El Pueblo was born out of that. Because soon after La Fiesta del Pueblo, North Carolina had a lot of questions about this emerging community. And so as soon as a group of people coalesced around this question, they started getting phone calls. Well, how many Latinos are there? Well, why are they coming here? Are they planning on staying? And what is this all about? And, this group of people were not necessarily prepared to answer all of these questions, but they knew that somebody had to be. And so they decided to create a nonprofit organization that could answer some of those questions on a more macro level. There were already organizations that are called centros that have emerged all over North Carolina. Centros provide the day-to-day direct services that the Latino community needs when they first arrive here in North Carolina. How do I enroll my kids in school? Where do we get vaccinations? What are the laws here? How do I rent a house? I've been working for 6 weeks and my boss won't pay me. What do I do? Centros deal with everything you can imagine that an immigrant would face every day. That's what centros do. El Pueblo doesn't do that. El Pueblo doesn't provide direct services. What we do is we work on the public policy and advocacy level, and we try to go after the laws and the policies that really are dealing with the Latino community, and particularly in a time when there were not a whole lot of Latinos that were sitting around the table. So that's a little bit about our organization. So what I'm going to start talking to you about today is I'm going to start with the numbers, because this is where it all starts. It starts with the numbers, because these are the census numbers that came out in 2000. In 2000, the United States Census came out and announced that Latinos were the largest ethnic minority in the country. This sent shockwaves through the United States. The United States was not ready to hear these numbers, and it meant a lot. These census numbers are all about, they're not just about districts and services and taxes, but they say a lot about who we are as a nation. And for the first time, these numbers came out, and the whole country was just sort of in a shock, in a state of, what does this mean for us? What does this mean about our country? What does this mean for the African American community? It meant, what does this mean for our struggle, our movement, our efforts that we are still trying to accomplish? What does this mean when this new community comes in and starts competing for the same rights, the same resources, the same things? What does this mean for us? At the same time, the numbers came out in 2000 that North Carolina was the fastest growing Latino state in the country. And all throughout North Carolina, you heard, what does that mean? North Carolina as a Latino state? Now, the thing is that I arrived here in 2000, just in time for all of the fun to start popping off in this state. And so I remember coming here as a Latina, born in Chicago, English as my first language, struggling to learn Spanish. My Spanish is really broken. I, have a lot of trouble when I visit family in Mexico, and I have a funny accent. Sometimes I sound like I'm Mexican, Puerto Rican, Colombian. It's all very confusing to people around me. And I remember coming here to North Carolina and realizing that it was a very different thing to be Latina in North Carolina than it was in Chicago. Because the thing about North Carolina was that it doesn't have an immigrant history like Chicago did, or like New York, or Arizona, or New Mexico, or Texas, or it just didn't have that same type of history. And so North Carolina historically had been an African American and Anglo state with pockets of American Indians throughout. So all of a sudden, this new community comes in, and the state's grappling with what this means. And so it continues to grapple with that question. But I want to ground that number, because the fastest growing Latino state, 394% of growth. I mean, that's, exponential rate of growth in the state of North Carolina. What does that mean? In actuality, what it means is that North Carolina, we'll speak a little bit, facetiously, had 0 Latinos, and then it had 100 Latinos. Because in reality, there are estimated 650,000 Latinos that live in this state, and of that number, about 300,000 to 350,000 are undocumented. 4% to 6% in different areas of the state. That's how much of North Carolina's population the Latino community is. So it's still a really small community. It just means that North Carolina didn't have a Latino community, and now it does. But it by no means that the Latino community is somehow taking over North Carolina. But when that number came out, that was the sense that was sparked in people, that somehow they were losing control of their state, that they were losing control of their communities. Now, these numbers, there are a lot of statistics, there are a lot of facts, a lot of, taxes and districting and things like that. But at heart, what they did was they triggered a sense in the country and in North Carolina that had more to do with a gut reaction, an emotional reaction that said, there's not enough. There's just not enough. There's not enough jobs. There's not enough houses. There's not enough room. There's not enough taxes. There's not enough schools. There's not enough. There's just not enough. And if there's not enough, then who gets and who doesn't get? And it immediately set up this us versus them dynamic between Latinos and the rest of North Carolina. And the fact of the matter being that Latinos is a really diverse statement. It's a really diverse statement. It's everybody from the recently arrived undocumented immigrant to me, the American-born Latina, half Latina, who is really, this is my country. So when people have said